I used to think exhaustion was temporary, that if I could just get through one more week, one more appointment, one more sleepless night, things would ease up. Life would slow down. I'd breathe again. I didn't realize I was standing at the beginning of the worst chapter of my life, not the middle. My name is Emily. I was 32, 5 months pregnant, married for 4 years, and living in Plano, Texas, when everything quietly started to fall apart. From the outside, my life looked stable, comfortable, the kind of life people describe as lucky. A husband with a good job, a house in a safe neighborhood, a baby on the way. Inside, I was barely holding myself together when my father's cancer worsened. Everything else faded into the background. He lived alone in Fort Worth, about 40 minutes away. After my mom passed years earlier, he'd learned how to survive on his own, quietly, stubbornly, refusing help until his body finally betrayed him. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctor didn't soften it. He didn't need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. Months, not years. I remember gripping the edge of the chair in that sterile office, one hand instinctively resting on my stomach, feeling my baby move, as if reminding me that life was still happening, even as something else was ending. I didn't cry until I got to the parking lot. From that point on, my days blended together. Mornings at home, afternoons in Fort Worth, evenings driving back exhausted, my feet swollen, my back aching, my emotions stretched thin. Sometimes I stayed overnight at the hospital, sleeping in a stiff plastic chair beside my father's bed, listening to the steady beeping of machines, and wondering how many memories I was about to lose forever. My husband, Mark, came with me once. He stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, checking his phone too often, nodding politely, while my dad tried to make conversation. Afterward, in the car, Mark said, "I'm just not good with this kind of stuff." I nodded. I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy to ask for more. Mark worked in commercial real estate in Dallas. Long hours, endless calls, meetings that ran late. I used to admire his ambition. I told myself his distance wasn't disinterest. It was stress. Love, I believed, sometimes meant being patient, even when you felt lonely. He kissed my forehead instead of my lips. He fell asleep on the couch more often. His phone was always in his hand. I made excuses for all of it, because making excuses felt easier than facing the possibility that something was wrong. Rachel was my best friend. We met in college at the University of Oklahoma, bonded over bad coffee, late nights, and shared dreams that felt urgent back then. She stood beside me on my wedding day, cried when I told her I was pregnant, promised she'd always be there. She lived 15 minutes away in Frisco, and started coming over more often once my pregnancy became harder and my father's condition declined. She brought food, folded laundry, sat with me when I cried on the couch after long hospital days, when I had to rush to Fort Worth unexpectedly. She offered to stop by and check on Mark. At the time, it sounded like kindness. I was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. My body felt foreign to me, heavier, slower, constantly aching. My emotions spilled out unexpectedly. I cried over commercials, over empty cereal boxes, over the way my dad's hands shook when he tried to hold mine. I still loved my husband. I loved the man I believed he was. So when he started dressing better for work, new shirts, new cologne, I assumed he was trying to feel confident again. When he angled his phone away from me, I told myself it was work-related. Rachel mentioned him casually in conversation. Mark was really stressed when I saw him yesterday, she said once. I didn't question it. Of course she'd seen him. She was helping. We were all helping each other, right? One night at the hospital, my father woke suddenly and gripped my hand. "You look tired, sweetheart," he said. "I'm okay," I replied automatically. He shook his head slowly. "No, you're being strong. That's different." I went to the bathroom afterward and cried silently. One hand pressed to my stomach, feeling my baby shift as if responding to my breath. I texted Mark. "Dad had a rough day. I might stay here tonight." He replied 20 minutes later. "Okay, love you." No follow-up, no offer to come. 5 minutes later, Rachel texted, "Do you need me to stop by your place tonight? Make sure Mark eats something." I hesitated, then replied, "That would be great, thank you." I thought I was lucky. When I came home the next afternoon, the house felt different. Not messy, not dirty, just off. There was a faint, unfamiliar scent in the living room. The pillows on the couch were arranged differently. The dishwasher had been run, but not unloaded the way I usually did it. Mark was at work. Rachel had left a note on the counter. Stopped by last night. Mark was exhausted. I made pasta and cleaned up a bit. Call me when you get home, yellow heart. I smiled. I remember holding that note and feeling relief instead of suspicion, gratitude instead of doubt. I didn't know that my life, my marriage, my trust, my sense of safety was already being quietly dismantled while I was focused on keeping everyone else alive. The weeks after that blurred together in a way I can only describe as survival mode. I stopped measuring time in days and started measuring it in hospital visits, medication schedules, and how many hours of sleep I could steal before my body gave up on me completely. Pregnancy exhaustion is one thing. Grief exhaustion is another. Together, they hollow you out. Every morning, I woke up already tired. Mark left early for work, earlier than he used to. He kissed my forehead, grabbed his coffee, and was gone before I fully registered the sound of the door closing. I told myself it was temporary, that once my father stabilized, if he stabilized, things would slow down again. Rachel filled in the gaps. She came over when I was gone, sometimes when I was home. She brought groceries without asking, reorganized my pantry, folded baby clothes I hadn't had the energy to touch yet. "You need to rest," she kept telling me. "You're doing too much." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. My father started declining faster in early spring. He stopped eating much. Talking tired him out. His voice grew weaker, softer, like every word cost him something. I sat beside his bed for hours, holding his hand, telling him stories from my childhood, from my pregnancy, from a future he wouldn't see, but pretended to imagine anyway. "What are you going to name the baby?" he asked one afternoon. I smiled through the lump in my throat. "We haven't decided yet." He nodded slowly. "Good, take your time. Names matter." When I left the hospital that night, I sat in my car and cried until my chest hurt. I called Mark. It rang and rang and rang. He texted me 15 minutes later. "In a meeting, what's up?" I stared at the screen, then typed, "Dad is getting worse." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "I'm sorry," he finally replied. "That's really hard." That was it. No call, no offer to come, no questions. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel until my hands ached. When I walked into the house, Rachel was there. She was sitting at the kitchen table with Mark, both of them laughing softly over something on his phone. They looked up at the same time when I entered, like kids caught doing something they weren't supposed to be doing. "Oh, hey," Rachel said quickly, standing up. "I didn't know when you'd be back." Mark smiled. "You okay?" I nodded, automatically. Always automatically. "Just tired." Rachel touched my arm. "You should go lie down. We were just about to finish up here." Wait. I went upstairs and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to their voices drift up from below. I couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm of conversation. Comfortable, familiar. Something about it made my chest feel tight. I shifted, trying to find a position that didn't make my back ache, and felt my baby kick sharply. "I know," I whispered. "I know." That night, Mark came to bed late. I pretended to be asleep when he slipped under the covers, his phone screen lighting up the room briefly before he turned it face down on the nightstand. He smelled different. Not bad. Just not familiar. I didn't say anything. I told myself I was imagining it. The next few weeks followed the same pattern. Rachel knew Mark's schedule better than I did. She mentioned things casually, meetings, deadlines, stressors, as if they were common knowledge. Mark said his client pushed the closing again, she said once, handing me a glass of water. I frowned slightly. "Oh, he didn't mention that." She laughed. "You know him. He doesn't like to complain." I let it go, because letting it go was easier than questioning the people I trusted most. My father was moved into hospice care at the end of that month. The room was quieter there, softer, like everyone was already speaking in past tense. I stayed with him as much as I could, sleeping in that same stiff chair, my body aching, my emotions frayed. One night, as I sat alone beside him, my phone buzzed. A message from Rachel. Just wanted you to know Mark got home safe tonight. I stayed until he fell asleep. I read it twice, then a third time. Something cold settled in my stomach. I typed back slowly. You stayed late. Her reply came almost instantly. Yeah, he was really stressed. I didn't want him to be alone. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, my baby shifting restlessly inside me. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself she was helping. But for the first time, the thought crept in uninvited and terrifying. Why was my best friend taking care of my husband when I wasn't there? I put the phone face down and reached for my father's hand, squeezing it gently as if anchoring myself to something real. That night, for the first time in months, I didn't sleep at all. Once the thought took root, it refused to stay quiet. I tried to push it down at first, labeled it exhaustion, hormones, stress, anything but what it threatened to become. Because the alternative, that my husband and my best friend were capable of betraying me while I was breaking apart, felt too large to hold. So I didn't accuse. I observed, and observation changes everything. I started noticing how often Rachel's name came up in my house when I wasn't there. Not directly, never directly, just traces. A mug in the sink I didn't recognize. The faint smell of her citrus shampoo lingering in the guest bathroom. The way Mark would answer his phone and step outside, lowering his voice, his body angling away from me without thinking. One afternoon, I came home earlier than expected. My doctor had shortened my appointment after noticing my blood pressure creeping higher than it should have been. I opened the front door quietly. Mark was on the couch, phone to his ear, laughing. Not his polite laugh, not his work laugh, his real one. He froze when he saw me. Hey, he said too quickly, ending the call. You're home early. I nodded. Doctor's appointment ended sooner. Everything okay? Yes, I replied. Who was that? He didn't hesitate, which somehow made it worse. Rachel, she was just checking in. Checking in on him. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and tried to slow my breathing. My baby kicked, sharp and insistent, as if responding to my rising pulse. I know, I whispered again. I feel it too. That night, while Mark showered, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I wasn't proud of what I did next, but I was desperate. I glanced at the screen. Rachel read the message preview, cut off mid-sentence. I keep thinking about last night. My hands started shaking. I didn't unlock the phone. I didn't scroll. I didn't need to. The world narrowed to that single line of text, glowing against the dark screen like an accusation. When Mark came out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, I had already put the phone back exactly where it was. He kissed my cheek and asked if I was okay. I said yes. The lie tasted bitter in my mouth. The next day, my father took a turn for the worse. His breathing became shallow, irregular. The nurse called me early that morning, and I drove to Fort Worth on autopilot, my mind split between dread and disbelief. Rachel texted me halfway there. "I can come stay with Mark tonight if you want. You don't need to worry about anything." Something inside me snapped, not loudly, but decisively. "No," I replied. "He can take care of himself." There was a long pause before she answered. "Of course, just trying to help." Help. That word had started to feel poisoned. That evening, as I sat beside my father's bed, I realized something painful and clarifying. Mark hadn't come once since that first visit. Rachel had been there more for him than he had been for me. I watched my father struggle for breath, his chest rising and falling unevenly, and felt a deep, hollow anger settle in my bones. I wasn't just losing my dad. I was being abandoned. The confirmation came 2 days later. I returned home unexpectedly in the afternoon, my mind numb after a long conversation with the hospice doctor. I parked down the street, not thinking about why, just following instinct. The house was quiet, too quiet. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Laughter came from the living room. Their laughter, Mark and Rachel were sitting close together on the couch. Too close. Her hand rested on his arm. His body leaned toward hers in a way that made my stomach drop. They didn't see me at first. I watched them for a few seconds that felt like years. Then Rachel looked up, her face drained of color. Mark turned. No one spoke. The silence was absolute. I placed my hand on my stomach, steadying myself. "I'm sorry," Rachel said first. Her voice trembled. "This isn't what it looks like." That was when Mark finally spoke. "Emily, I can explain." I laughed, a short, broken sound that didn't feel like it came from me. "Not today," I said quietly. "Today, I'm going back to the hospital." I turned and walked out before either of them could touch me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I drove straight back to Fort Worth, my hands steady on the wheel, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might tear me apart. That night, sitting beside my father as he slept, I finally let myself understand the truth. While I was carrying his child, while I was watching my father die, the two people I trusted most were choosing each other, and my life would never be the same. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. Not that night, not the next morning, not even when the truth pressed so hard against my chest that breathing felt like work. I stayed with my father. That night, he drifted in and out of sleep, his hand curled weakly around mine. The room was dim, the machines steady and indifferent. I watched his face, memorizing it, every line, every familiar detail, knowing time was slipping through my fingers faster than I could accept. My phone buzzed constantly. Mark, Rachel, Mark again. I turned it face down and didn't answer. For the first time in months, my focus narrowed to something simple and brutal. Be here for my father, for my baby, for myself. My dad passed away just before sunrise. It was quiet, almost gentle. One moment he was breathing, shallow but present. The next he was. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I just knew. I leaned forward and pressed my forehead to his hand. My tears falling silently onto the hospital blanket. I'm here, I whispered. You're not alone. The nurse came in a few minutes later. She spoke softly, gave me time. I called Mark then. He answered on the second ring. Emily, his voice sounded cautious, nervous. He's gone, I said. There was a pause, too long. I'm so sorry, he replied. Do you want me to come? I closed my eyes. Yes, I said, I do. Mark arrived an hour later. He looked out of place in the hospice room, like he didn't know where to put his hands, his eyes darting everywhere except at me. He hugged me carefully, like I was fragile glass. I didn't lean into him. Rachel didn't come. I noticed that too. The days that followed moved in slow motion. Arrangements, paperwork, phone calls I barely remember making. My body went through the motions while my mind hovered somewhere above it all, detached and watchful. Mark stayed close, attentive in a way he hadn't been in months. He brought me food I didn't eat, asked if I needed anything every few minutes, touched my back gently as if trying to remind me he was there. It felt rehearsed. Rachel texted once, I'm so sorry about your dad. I'm here whenever you're ready. I didn't reply. The funeral was held in Fort Worth, small and quiet, just like my father would have wanted. Mark stood beside me, his hand on my lower back. Rachel sat several rows behind us, her face pale, eyes fixed on the floor. I didn't look at her. After the service, people hugged me, whispered condolences, told me how strong I was. I wanted to laugh at that word. Strong. I felt hollow, scraped clean. That night, back home in Plano, I finally spoke. We were sitting at the kitchen table. The house too quiet, without my father's presence in the world. Mark kept glancing at me like he was bracing for something. Tell me the truth, I said. His shoulders tensed. About what? I met his eyes, really met them. You and Rachel. The silence that followed was absolute. He didn't deny it. That was the worst part. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his hands together like he was cold. It wasn't supposed to happen, he said. It just did. I nodded. How long? I asked. He hesitated. Since March. I had been pregnant, driving back and forth to Fort Worth, watching my father fade. And you never thought to stop? I asked quietly. I didn't want to hurt you, he said. I stared at him in disbelief. You made choices every single day, I said. Hurting me just wasn't important enough to stop. He started crying then. Real tears, apologies tumbling out of him in a rush. He blamed stress, loneliness, circumstances. I listened. Then I stood up. "I'm going to sleep," I said. "You should take the couch." That night, I felt my baby kick more than ever before. I lay awake, one hand on my stomach, feeling each movement like a reminder of why I couldn't fall apart. Not completely. Something inside me shifted. Grief was still there. Anger was there too. But beneath it all, something steadier began to form. Clarity. The next morning, I called a lawyer in Dallas. I didn't tell Mark. I didn't tell Rachel. I told myself that was enough. Calling the lawyer felt unreal. I sat in my car outside a grocery store in Plano, hands resting on my stomach, listening to the ringtone echo through the cabin. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked older than I remembered. Tired, sharper around the eyes. When the lawyer answered, her voice was calm, professional, grounded. She didn't rush me. She didn't interrupt when my voice wavered. She just listened. By the time I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. I did confront Rachel right away. That surprised even me. A part of me wanted to storm into her apartment in Frisco, scream, demand explanations. Tear apart every shared memory we'd built over the years. But another part of me, the one that had learned how to survive hospital rooms and long nights alone, knew better. I needed information. I needed timing. I needed strength. Mark tried to talk. He hovered around me like a ghost, offering help, asking questions I didn't answer, apologizing in ways that sounded rehearsed and empty. "I'll end it," he said one night. "I swear, I already told her it's over." I looked at him and felt nothing. "That's between you and her," I said. "This is between you and me." He didn't understand that. He thought the affair was the problem. It was. The betrayal was. Rachel finally cornered me 3 days later. She showed up at the house unannounced, eyes red, face tight with guilt and fear. I was sitting on the couch, paperwork spread out in front of me, insurance forms, funeral documents, prenatal appointments. She stood in the doorway like she didn't know whether to come in or run. "Emily," she said softly, "please let me explain." I didn't move. "You have 5 minutes," I replied. She stepped inside slowly, wringing her hands together. "It started when you were never home," she said quickly. Mark was lonely. He needed someone. And I was just trying to help at first. I stared at her. "Do you hear yourself?" I asked. She burst into tears. "I never meant to hurt you." I stood up. "That's not true," I said calmly. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You just didn't think I'd find out." She shook her head. "I love you. You're my best friend." I felt something harden in my chest. Best friends don't crawl into each other's marriages, I said. She reached for me. I stepped back. "We're done," I said. "Not just as friends, as anything." Her face crumpled. "You're pregnant," she whispered. "You need support." I looked at her, finally letting my anger show. "I needed support when my father was dying," I said. "You chose someone else." She left without another word. That night, Mark told me Rachel had stopped responding to his messages. Good, but it didn't fix anything. The legal process moved faster than I expected. The lawyer laid everything out clearly: custody, assets, documentation, my options. She told me what to prepare for and what not to expect. I didn't cry in her office. I cried later, alone in the shower, the water scalding my skin as if trying to wash the past year off my body. Mark tried one last time. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands shaking. "I'll do therapy," he said. "Couples counseling, whatever you want." I met his eyes. "I want peace," I said, "and I won't find it with you." The words felt final the moment I spoke them. He broke down. I stayed still. In the weeks that followed, my life began rearranging itself. I moved into the guest room. Then, eventually, into a small apartment in McKinney, closer to my doctor and farther from memories. I couldn't breathe around anymore. Rachel stopped reaching out. Mutual friends asked questions. I answered them honestly, without drama, without exaggeration. The truth did enough damage on its own. One evening, as I lay on my side in my new bed, my baby shifted gently inside me. I placed my hand on my stomach and whispered, "I'm choosing us now." For the first time since everything began, I believed it. The closer I got to my due date, the quieter everything became. Not peaceful, just quiet. The kind of quiet that follows destruction, when the dust hasn't settled yet, but nothing is actively falling anymore. My days in McKinney took on a new rhythm. Prenatal appointments, short walks when my back allowed it. Evenings spent assembling the crib my father never got to see. Mark respected the distance, at least outwardly. Communication was reduced to logistics. Messages about paperwork, insurance, the baby, nothing else. That hurt in a strange way. Not because I missed him, but because it confirmed how easily he'd stepped out of my life once there was nothing left to take from me. Rachel disappeared completely. No messages, no apologies, no dramatic goodbye. Just absence. And I learned something important from that. People who betray you rarely want closure. They want forgiveness without consequences. When they realize they won't get it, they vanish. Labor started on a humid night in late July. I woke up alone in the apartment, pain low and steady, spreading through my body like a tide. I couldn't stop. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, breathing through it, my hand resting on my stomach. "It's okay," I whispered. "We're ready." I called my doctor first, then my sister-in-law, then Mark. He arrived at the hospital in Plano before dawn, nervous, pale, hovering at the edges of the room, like he wasn't sure where he belonged anymore. And he didn't, but he was still the father. I let him stay, not for him, for the child who deserved a beginning without bitterness. Hours blurred together, pain breathing, focus. At one point, during a particularly intense contraction, I thought of my father, of his voice, of the way he'd told me names mattered. When my daughter finally cried for the first time, something inside me broke open in the best possible way. She was real, warm mine. They placed her on my chest, and I cried without shame, without restraint, without fear of falling apart. "Hello," I whispered. "I'm your mom." Mark stood back, tears in his eyes, asking quietly if he could hold her. I said yes, but when he handed her back to me, I knew with absolute certainty that this was where my responsibility began, and where his ended in the way marriage defines it. We spoke later that day, calmly. "I won't fight you," he said. "I just want to be present for her." "You can be," I replied, "as her father, not as my husband." He nodded. That was the most honest moment we'd shared in years. The months after were hard. Exhaustion returned, a different kind this time. Sleepless nights, feedings, learning how to exist in a body that had changed forever. But there was also clarity. No guessing, no second guessing, no walking on emotional landmines. Just me and my daughter learning each other. Friends showed up in unexpected ways. Neighbors offered help. A woman from my prenatal class brought meals without asking questions. I learned to accept help without guilt. One afternoon, while rocking my daughter to sleep, my phone buzzed. A message from Rachel. "I think about you every day. I hope one day you can forgive me." I read it once, then I deleted it. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't always reconciliation. Sometimes it's simply choosing not to carry someone else's shame for them. The divorce finalized quietly that winter. No courtroom drama, no shouting, just signatures and an ending. I walked out of the building holding my daughter's carrier, the air cold and sharp against my face, and felt something unexpected. Relief. I still think about that year sometimes, about how much I carried without realizing how heavy it was. A pregnancy, a dying parent, a marriage that was already gone. I didn't survive because I was strong. I survived because I stopped pretending. I had to endure everything alone. If there's one thing I know now, it's this: betrayal doesn't end you. It clarifies you. And sometimes, the life you rebuild from the ruins is truer and quieter than anything you had before. Time does something strange after everything breaks. It doesn't rush in to heal you. It doesn't erase what happened. It simply keeps moving, and eventually you move with it. 3 years passed, not in a blur, like the year everything fell apart, but slowly, deliberately, marked by small, ordinary moments that quietly stitched me back together. My daughter learned how to walk in the narrow hallway of our apartment in McKinney. her hands reaching for the walls, her laugh filling the space in a way that felt almost unreal at first. I remember sitting on the floor, tears streaming down my face, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming knowledge that I had survived long enough to see joy again. We moved later to a small house near Allen, close to a park where I took her every morning. I found work I could do from home, built routines that didn't revolve around crisis or damage control. I learned how to live without bracing myself. Mark became what he said he wanted to be, a present father. He picked her up on weekends, attended school events, called when she was sick. We spoke politely, carefully, like two people who had finally accepted that the chapter we shared was closed. He never asked for more, and I never offered. That was our unspoken agreement. I ran into Rachel once. It happened at a grocery store in Frisco, completely by accident. I was reaching for apples when I felt a presence beside me that made my shoulders tense before my mind caught up. She looked thinner, older, less certain. "Emily," she said softly. I turned. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I saw the questions in her eyes, hope, regret, fear, all tangled together. "How are you?" she asked. I looked down at my daughter, sitting in the cart, swinging her legs and humming to herself. "I'm good," I said honestly. Rachel nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm glad," she said. "You deserve that." I didn't disagree. We stood there for another second. Then she stepped aside to let me pass. That was it. No apologies. No closure speech. No dramatic reckoning. Just an ending. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the woman I was during that pregnancy. The one who drove back and forth between Plano and Fort Worth, holding her world together with exhaustion and hope. The one who trusted without question. The one who believed love meant endurance. I don't judge her anymore. She did the best she could with what she knew, and she became the woman who knew better. My father never met his granddaughter. That grief still stings, sharp and sudden when I least expect it. But sometimes, when she laughs a certain way, or looks at me with a quiet seriousness that feels too old for her years, I see him there. I tell her stories about him, about his kindness, his stubbornness, the way he loved deeply, even when he didn't know how to say it. Names matter. I named her Grace. I don't think of what happened as something that ruined my life anymore. It revealed it. It showed me who would walk away when things got hard, and who I could become when I stopped waiting for someone else to save me. If you're listening to this story and you're in the middle of something similar, pregnant, grieving, abandoned, betrayed, hear this. You are not weak for being overwhelmed. You are not foolish for having trusted. And you are not broken because someone chose themselves over you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is keep going quietly, one day at a time, until you realize you've already built a life that no one can take from you. That's how it ended, not with revenge, not with rage, but with peace.